Picture this, right? You are looking at like a sweeping cinematic timeline of human history.
Oh, I love a good timeline.
Yeah. And usually when we talk about governments or, the lifespan of political influence, we tend to think in terms of election cycles.
Right, like 4 years, maybe 8.
Exactly. Maybe a decade or two if a particular ideological movement has serious momentum. But I want you to zoom in on a very specific, just astonishing window of time, from 187 CE to 235 CE.
Okay, so that is exactly 48 years.
48 years. For nearly half a century, the most powerful political entity on the face of the earth, the Roman Empire, had its rulers chosen, guided, and sometimes literally overthrown by women from a single priestly family from Emesa, Syria.
I mean, 48 years, that span of continuous orchestrated influence is, well, it's longer than the survival of many modern governments.
It's wild. We're looking at the architecture of a dynasty that ruled the ancient world completely from the shadows.
It truly is a staggering block of time when you contextualize it against the sheer violent volatility of the ancient world.
Oh, absolutely.
You are talking about almost 5 decades where the epicenter of global power wasn't necessarily the Senate House in Rome.
No, it was arguably wherever these 4 specific Syrian women happened to be standing at the time.
Exactly.
And that is the mission of this capstone deep dive. We're zooming all the way out today.
Getting the big picture.
Right. We want to welcome you, the listener, back to this final piece of the puzzle. Because you've explored the individual pieces with us. But today, we are looking at all 4 of these women, Julia Domna, Julia Maesa, Julia Soaemias, and Julia Mamaea.
Not as isolated historical figures,
but as one interconnected dynastic epic. And to figure out how they actually pulled off this half-century run, we're pulling from a towering stack of verified historical research.
Yeah, the sheer volume of evidence we have to synthesize here is what makes this so compelling. I mean, this isn't just a collection of palace rumors, right?
Definitely not.
We are drawing from primary sources, eyewitnesses like the Roman senator Cassius Dio, who was literally in the room.
He was right there, navigating the politics of their reign.
Yeah, and we have the historian Herodian. But beyond the textual sources, which, can be biased, we have incredibly hard physical data.
The coins.
Yes, monumental inscriptions and numismatic evidence, thousands upon thousands of surviving coins.
Which is just incredible. And we're filtering all of this through some major modern scholarly breakthroughs.
Oh, absolutely. I'm talking about Barbara Leavick's foundational 2007 biography, Claire Rowan's extensive numismatic studies.
And Caius Torri's 2016 legal analysis of Roman bureaucracy, which is huge.
Right, plus Mary T. Boatwright's definitive 2021 work on the Imperial women of Rome.
So that mountain of verified data is what we're using today to answer 3 overarching questions that basically define this entire era.
Let's hear them.
Question 1. How did they actually do it? Like, how do you rule when you have 0 formal constitutional power?
A great question.
Right. Question 2. Why did this incredible 48-year run inevitably collapse in the mud of a German military camp in 235 CE?
It's a dramatic ending.
It really is. And question 3. Why don't we know their names today?
Yeah, that's the tragedy of it all.
So let's get our players on the board one last time for you. We have Julia Domna, the trailblazer who establishes the template.
Yeah.
Her older sister, Julia Maesa, the supreme political operative. Maesa's 2 daughters, Julia Soaemias, who rules alongside her teenage son and, well, pushes the boundaries until it destroys her.
Which we will definitely get into.
Oh, we will. And finally, Julia Maesa, who reaches the absolute constitutional apex right before the entire system comes crashing down.
So it's 4 women, 0 formal power, maximum impact.
Okay, let's unpack this paradox of power. Because it really is a paradox, right? If you're a Roman emperor, your authority rests on very tangible pillars.
Oh, definitely. You have legions sworn directly to you.
Yeah, you have a legal constitutional framework, Lex de Imperio, that legally grants you the authority to enact laws, command troops, execute enemies.
All the official stuff.
Right. But these women had none of that.
Right.
No armies of their own, no legal framework that said, the empress is officially in charge. So what were the actual tools of this invisible power? How do you force an empire to bend to your will without a legal mandate?
Well, to understand the mechanics of their toolkit, we have to look really closely at the second woman in our quartet, Julia Maesa.
Okay.
And the very first tool she deployed was unimaginably vast, highly liquid wealth.
Cash is king. or in this case, queen.
Exactly, because while they completely lacked legal authority, they possessed just staggering fortunes, and they understood exactly how to weaponize that capital.
So how did that actually work on the ground? Let's look at the pivotal moment in 217 CE. Julia Domna has just died. The Emperor Caracalla has been assassinated.
A very chaotic time.
Very. And a new guy, Macrinus, takes the throne. Now, Macrinus knows the Syrian women are a threat, so he exiles Julia Maesa back to her hometown of Emesa in Syria.
Right, get her out of the capital.
But Macrinus makes what seems like a catastrophic, unforced error. According to Herodian, Macrinus exiles her, but he allows her to keep her entire massive personal fortune.
Yeah,
I mean, why on earth would he do that? Why not just confiscate the wealth?
it seems baffling to a modern mind, right? Like, just take the money. But it comes down to the really complex nature of Roman elite wealth and religious protections.
Okay, how so?
Well, Macrinus' family were hereditary high priests of the sun god Elagabal in Emesa, so a significant portion of their wealth was likely deeply intertwined with temple treasuries and vast generational provincial estates.
So it wasn't just checking accounts he could freeze.
Exactly. Confiscating that outright without a formal treason trial would have caused a massive uproar in the eastern provinces, and Macrinus desperately needed to keep those provinces stable.
So he just assumed that geography was a sufficient cage.
Yes. He thought if he just moved her away from the capital, her money wouldn't matter. He fundamentally failed to understand the logistics of military loyalty.
Oh man, did he ever. So Maesa is sitting in Emesa. She looks around and she sees Legio III Gallica, a massive Roman legion stationed nearby at a camp called Rafana.
Yeah, just right next door, basically.
She doesn't have the legal authority to command a single one of those soldiers, but she has the gold to buy all of them. What does it physically look like to buy a Roman legion?
Oh, it requires a profound logistical operation. I mean, you were talking about roughly 5,000 heavily armed men.
That's a lot of payroll.
Right. Roman legionaries were paid in denarii and auri, silver and gold coins. Their loyalty was highly mercenary. It was heavily dependent on donativa, which were massive cash bonuses handed out by emperors to secure allegiance.
So she just cuts out the middleman.
Pretty much. Maesa essentially steps in and acts as a rogue imperial treasury. She uses her wealth to distribute an overwhelming influx of silver and gold directly into the camp at Rafana.
Wow.
She proved categorically that a woman without a single constitutional role could dictate who wore the imperial purple simply by cornering the market on military compensation.
It's literally like a private, hostile corporate takeover. But, the shareholders carry swords.
That is a perfect way to put it.
But even in antiquity, raw mercenary bribery has its limits, right?
Yeah.
The soldiers need a narrative.
Yes, they do.
They need a public justification to overthrow Macrinus that won't make them look like treasonous mercenaries to the rest of the empire.
Yeah.
They need some sort of legal cover.
Yeah, they needed a legitimate banner to march under. Which brings us to their second tool, the absolute mastery of dynastic legitimacy and, frankly, manipulation.
Fake news, basically.
Exactly. Maesa understands the psychology of the Roman soldier perfectly. The legions loved the previous emperor, Caracalla. He paid them well. He marched with them. He lived like them.
He was a soldier's emperor.
Right. So Maesa initiates this brilliant, calculated propaganda campaign centered on her 14-year-old grandson, Varius Avitus Bassianus, who we know as Elagabalus.
And he is the son of her daughter, Soaemias. So Maesa needs a figurehead. She needs a male vessel for the soldiers to rally behind.
Yeah.
How does she manufacture that legitimacy out of thin air?
She spreads a rumor that young Elagabalus is actually the illegitimate son of the beloved assassinated emperor Caracalla.
Oh.
Yeah, she actively sacrifices her own daughter's reputation. She publicly claims Soaemias had an affair with Caracalla just to create this direct bloodline connection.
That is just incredible. It's like using aggressive PR to manipulate the loyalty of the board of directors. Look, we shouldn't follow Macrinus. Here's the old beloved CEO's secret kid. He's the true heir.
Exactly.
How did contemporary sources react to this? Because Cassius Dio, the Roman senator, is watching this whole thing unfold in real time.
Oh, Dio is utterly repulsed by the entire operation. He explicitly calls this a bastard pretense.
Yikes.
Yeah, the Greek word he uses in his text is moichidion, which implies something adulterous and counterfeit. Herodian is equally blunt, stating clearly that Maesa was inventing the story.
So modern historians must agree it was a total fabrication.
Oh, universally. Modern scholarship, including historians like OrigineX and Claire Rowan, universally agree this was a highly fabricated, politically engineered rumor.
So how did it actually spread? Before Twitter, I mean.
Through whispers in the baths, through agents planted in the military camps, through forged letters. And the thing is, the soldiers latched onto it eagerly.
Because they wanted the money.
Yes. Not because they necessarily believed the story, but because they wanted an excuse to take Maesa's gold and overthrow Macrinus under the guise of, restoring the rightful dynasty.
So she leverages the wealth, she seeds the fake news, and then she pulls the trigger. The timeline here is thrilling. On the night of May 15th, 218 CE, Maesa literally smuggles her 14-year-old grandson into the military camp at Rafana.
And by sunrise, the soldiers proclaim him Emperor of Rome.
Just like that. And it all culminates just a few weeks later at the Battle of Antioch on June 8, 218 CE. Macrinus's forces clash with the legion Maesa bought. And there is this moment described by Dio that completely shatters the illusion of these women just sitting quietly behind palace walls knitting or something.
Oh, it's such a striking image.
At a critical juncture in the battle, when their troops begin to break line and retreat, Julia Maesa and her daughter Julia Soaemias physically leap from their carriages.
They do.
They rush directly onto the chaotic, bloody battlefield to rally the fleeing soldiers, screaming at them to hold the line.
They are literally jumping into the fray to protect their investment.
It's wild. But obviously, you cannot run an intricate global empire for 48 years just by throwing gold at soldiers and screaming on battlefields.
Well, eventually you have to govern.
Right. Once the dust settles and they have the throne, they have to legitimize their presence in the halls of power. They need permanent infrastructure.
And this is where we see their third critical tool, the deliberate acquisition and evolution of titles, the veneer of constitutionality.
Okay, explain that.
What's fascinating here is how these titles weren't just vanity plates or honorific compliments. They were architectural infrastructure. These women were running real-time constitutional experiments to create a framework for female co-rule that the Roman world had never encountered before.
Let's trace that evolution, starting with Julia Domna, the pioneer of the family.
Hmm.
When she marries Septimius Severus back in 187 CE, she starts collecting titles at just an unprecedented rate.
She really does.
In 193 CE, she becomes Augusta. That's a big deal signifying imperial status, but it's not entirely new. But then, in 195 CE, she is named Mater Castrorum, mother of the camp.
And the significance of Mater Castrorum really cannot be overstated. She is only the second woman in Roman history to receive it.
Wow, only the second.
Yeah, it explicitly, legally ties her to the military apparatus. It signals to the legions that she is part of their command structure, their patroness.
But Domna pushes the boundaries much further than that. By 299 CE, she is named Mater Augustrum, mother of the emperors.
Which is a huge step up.
And then, around 211 CE, she receives a title that basically broke the brains of traditional Romans. Mater Senatus et Patriae, mother of the Senate and the fatherland.
Yeah, that's the one.
That is the one that really stops you in your tracks. Mother of the Senate and fatherland. I mean, for centuries, the ultimate, undisputed title an emperor could hold was Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland.
Going all the way back to Augustus.
Exactly. It was the absolute apex of patriarchal Roman authority. And here is a woman from Syria stepping up and claiming the exact female equivalent. It is a direct constitutional counterpart to the emperor's supreme power. What does that signal to a traditional Roman senator?
It signals a terrifying shift in the power dynamic for them. The Senate viewed itself as the ancient governing body of Rome.
The ultimate boys' club.
Very much so. To have a woman declare herself the mother of that body implies an authority over them. It implies she guides them, disciplines them, and oversees them.
That must have been infuriating for them.
Oh, they hated it. And this escalation of titles just continues with the next generation. When Maesa and Soaemias orchestrate that coup for Elagabalus we talked about, they are both elevated to the rank of Augusta simultaneously.
Wait, really? Both of them at the same time?
Yes, that dual elevation was totally unprecedented. Soaemias, the mother of the emperor, eventually receives the senatorial title Clarissima and holds this massive cumulative titulature. Mater Castrorum et Senatus et totius domus divinae.
Mother of the camps, the Senate, and the entire divine house.
Exactly.
It is like they are systematically building a legal staircase to the top. And that staircase reaches its absolute summit with the final woman, Julia Mamaea.
Right. When Mamaea's son, Alexander Severus, becomes emperor in 222 CE, she's granted a title that shatters all the remaining glass ceilings. Consors Imperii.
Partner in rule.
Yes. Not mother of the ruler, not chief advisor, partner. It is the highest formal political authority a woman had ever officially held in Rome.
But, a title is just words carved into stone unless it is backed up by administrative action. Which takes us to their fourth and perhaps most vital tool: administrative gridlock and gatekeeping. Because, as anyone who has ever worked in a large organization knows, true power lies in the paperwork.
It's all about the inbox.
Exactly. Who controls the flow of information? Who decides whose petition gets onto the boss's desk?
Let's look at the incredible insights from Caius Tori's 2016 legal analysis here, because it fundamentally changed how we view their power.
Okay, unpack Tori for us.
Well, we have to understand the Roman patronage system, the clientela. Roman governance wasn't just passing broad laws, it was largely reactive. Citizens, cities, and generals sent petitions called libelli to the emperor, asking for legal rulings, funds, or promotions.
They're just constantly fielding requests.
Constantly. And if you control the desk where those petitions land, you essentially control the reality of the empire.
So what did that look like on a day-to-day basis for these women?
During the reign of her son Caracalla, Julia Domna was officially appointed to manage the imperial correspondence in both Greek and Latin. She held public receptions for prominent men, essentially functioning as the emperor's chief of staff. Cassius Dio specifically notes that during Caracalla's military campaigns in the east, all correspondence and petitions were routed through Domna at Antioch.
Wait, all of it? So if a governor in Gaul needs emergency grain funding, or a general on the Danube needs permission to attack, they send a wax-sealed papyrus, and it goes directly into Julia Domna's hands.
Precisely.
That's incredible.
And we see this mirrored with her nieces later on. The British Museum's analysis of Julia Soaemias concludes she managed the bulk of the administrative burden during her son Elagabalus's chaotic reign.
Since he was 14, and probably not super interested in budgets.
Exactly. And Mamaea, she essentially operated as the imperial chancellor. She controlled the imperial treasury, dictated foreign diplomatic policy, and made direct military appointments. She even appointed the famous Roman jurist Ulpian as praetorian prefect.
Okay, here is where I have a question about the absolute limits of their authority. If they are reading the mail, approving the provincial budgets, hiring the top generals, and literally holding the title of partner in rule, are we just looking at shadow emperors?
It's a fair question.
Were they sole autocrats who just happened to wear a different hat to appease the masses?
It is tempting to view them that way, but Tori's legal analysis and a close reading of Cassius Dio prevent us from calling them absolute autocrats.
Okay, why is that?
Dio is very careful with his language. He states that Domna handled the petitions and correspondence, quote, except in very important cases. The Greek phrase he uses is plantun panu anankaiton.
Except in very important cases. So there's a hard ceiling to what they could unilaterally decide.
Exactly. They were the ultimate gatekeepers, the supreme interlocutors. They filtered the vast bureaucracy of the Roman world. If you wanted something from the emperor, you had to navigate through them.
But they still needed the emperor.
Right. Their power was inherently derivative. It was firmly tethered to the male emperor, whether it was a husband, a son, or a grandson. They built and ran the machine, but the Roman legal framework still absolutely required a male figurehead sitting in the driver's seat to make the most critical decisions legally binding.
Which is a brilliant, highly effective system, right up until the figurehead breaks.
Yeah, that's the fatal flaw.
When the male vessel fails, the women who depend on him are suddenly totally exposed. And that realization transitions us directly to our second central question. Why did it end?
It's a tragic ending.
It is. If they had this masterful toolkit, unlimited wealth, propaganda mastery, unprecedented legal titles, and total control of the imperial bureaucracy, why did this 48-year golden age collapse?
Well, to understand the mechanics of the collapse, we have to travel to the very end of the line. We need to look at March of 235 CE on the frozen, muddy German frontier at a military camp called Mogontiacum.
Which is modern-day Mainz, right? The atmosphere in that camp must have been just suffocatingly tense. The heavily armed Rhine legions are stationed there, and they are absolutely furious. And their rage is directed at two specific targets, Julia Mamaea and her son, the Emperor Alexander Severus.
Yeah, Alexander and Mamaea had traveled to the northern frontier to deal with a massive incursion by the Alemanni, a Germanic confederation threatening the border.
And the legions are primed for a fight. They want the glory, and more importantly, they want the plunder and the bonuses that come from a victorious campaign.
But instead of marshaling the troops for war, Alexander utilizes his mother's preferred diplomatic tool. He attempts to bribe the Alemanni with massive shipments of gold to simply go away.
Now, from a grand strategic perspective, diplomacy over war makes logical sense, right? It saves Roman lives, it secures the border quickly.
Sure, on paper.
But to a hardened Roman legionary standing in the freezing mud, whose entire livelihood depends on the spoils of war, it is seen as deeply insulting cowardice.
It is insulting, and it exacerbates a second underlying fury directed at Mamaea herself. Remember, Mamaea is functioning as the imperial treasurer.
The one holding the purse strings.
Right. And the Roman economy is beginning to show the early strains of inflation, and she is famously strictly austere with the imperial budget. She controls the money, and she refuses to distribute the lavish donativa the soldiers have come to expect.
Big mistake.
Huge. The ancient historian Herodian directly blames her severe financial policies for the military discontent. The soldiers begin to view Alexander not as a military commander, but as a weak mama's boy, a puppet who refuses to let them fight because his mother refuses to open the purse strings.
We see that dynamic even in modern politics, honestly. Fiscal responsibility and budget cutting often get leaders ousted, while populists who promise to empty the treasury are absolutely adored.
It's a tale as old as time.
So the soldiers' resentment boils over into a full-blown mutiny. They proclaim a massive, brutally tough Thracian soldier named Maximinus Thrax as the new emperor.
And the assassination scene that follows is just chilling.
Herodian gives us the account, right?
He does. The mutinous soldiers storm the imperial tent. Alexander and Mamaea are cornered and assassinated together, and Herodian records this devastating detail. As he was being struck down, Alexander was physically clinging to his mother, crying, complaining, and lamenting that she was to blame for his death.
Wow. What a pathetic, deeply tragic end to a half-century dynasty. And it begs the analytical question for you, was this violent collapse inevitable?
When you examine the systemic vulnerabilities of the sovereign women's power structure, the answer points toward yes.
Really? Inevitable?
Because, as we established, their authority was parasitic in a political sense. It required a male host. The very dynastic bonds they utilized to rise to power became their fatal, inescapable weakness. They could never rule in their own right as sole sovereign.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword. You absolutely need the boy to hold the legal power, but if the boy proves incompetent, unpopular, or, cowardly in the eyes of the military, he drags you down into the grave with him.
Exactly. They were shackled to the success or failure of their sons.
And the brutal end in the mud of Mainz wasn't an isolated shock. There was massive visceral foreshadowing of this exact vulnerability 13 years earlier, in 222 CE.
Ah, you are referring to the fate of Julia Soaemias.
Yes, Soaemias and her son Elagabalus. When the soldiers, specifically the Praetorian Guard in Rome, finally turned on him, the backlash wasn't just a clinical political assassination, it was extraordinarily visceral.
It was horrifying.
It was deeply misogynistic and horrifyingly violent. On March 11th, 222 CE, the Praetorian Guard revolted. They cornered the teenage Emperor Elagabalus and his mother, Julia Soaemias, in the Praetorian camp. But they didn't just quietly execute them.
No, they made a spectacle of it.
They beheaded them. They stripped their bodies entirely naked, they dragged their corpses through the public streets of Rome, and then they unceremoniously threw them into the Tiber River. Why was the violence so distinctly brutal and sexualized?
Well, the scholar Eric Varner, in his 2004 work on Damnatio Memoriae, points out just how unprecedented this event was. Julia Soaemias was the very first Roman empress to suffer such horrific public desecration.
The first one ever.
Yeah. It is a practice known as poena post-mortem punishment after death. This extreme violence reveals the deep, primal anxiety and patriarchal rage that traditional Romans felt toward a woman who had wielded such visible, undeniable authority.
It was a reaction to her power.
Exactly. When the illusion of legitimate male rule finally shattered, the violence was designed to completely obliterate her, both physically and symbolically. It was a punishment for transgressing her gender role.
So when Mamaea falls 13 years later in Mainz, the tragic pattern is simply completing itself. But the consequences of Mamaea's death in 235 CE echo far, far beyond the extinction of a single-family line.
Oh, absolutely. If we look at the macro-historical picture, the assassination of Julia Mamaea is arguably one of the most catastrophic turning points in Western civilization.
That's a huge statement.
But it's true. Because these four sovereign women, for 48 years, functioned as the load-bearing architecture of the empire. They provided the bureaucratic continuity. They managed the vast administrative machine. They maintained the complex web of dynastic legitimacy that kept the fiercely competitive Roman armies relatively in check.
So when Mamaea took her last breath, the final stabilizing structure of the Roman world fell.
And the vacuum left behind immediately triggers what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century.
Which is just a nightmare era.
Exactly. The crisis ignites the moment Mamaea dies in 235 CE and burns for 50 agonizing years until 284 CE. It is a half-century of total unmitigated chaos.
That's the revolving door of emperors, right?
We see over 20 different men claim the title of emperor, endless grinding civil wars, catastrophic foreign invasions from the Sassanids and Germanic tribes, rampant plagues, and the total collapse of the Roman currency system.
So the death of the Syrian empresses marked the definitive brutal shift from dynastic legitimacy, where power is based on family continuity and bureaucratic management, to raw, brute military force.
After 235, whoever commanded the largest army on any given Tuesday was the emperor.
It really makes you wonder about the alternative. Let's speculate for a second. Let's say Alexander Severus and Mamaea decide not to bribe the Alemanni.
Okay, let's play this out.
They lead the legions into battle. They win a decisive victory. The soldiers get their plunder, and the mutiny at Mainz never happens. What would Rome have looked like if Mamaea had survived another 10 or 20 years? Could that Consors Imperium model, that official partner and rule framework for an empress, have become a permanent constitutional feature of the Roman Empire?
It is a fascinating counterfactual to consider, but the historical reality we are left with is that no subsequent imperial family ever managed to successfully replicate the stabilizing regency function.
Not even later on.
Even when you look much later at powerful empresses like Theodora in the Byzantine era, the mechanics of power were different. The unique Severan experiment, a matriarchal dynastic umbrella where women held official constitutional titles of state, openly managed the vast bureaucracy, and directed a series of male figureheads, that entire concept died in the mud of Mainz.
It was a 48-year anomaly that the Roman world never repeated.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our third and perhaps most frustrating question. If these 4 women effectively controlled the largest empire on Earth for half a century, and if their administrative system was the only thing keeping the world from plunging into 50 years of apocalyptic chaos, why aren't they household names?
It's a great question.
Why are we taught about Julius Caesar, Augustus, Nero, and Caligula, but almost nothing about Domna, Maesa, Soaemias, and Mamaea? How do you misplace 48 years of global history?
Well, you lose it because the architecture of erasure deployed against them was just as sophisticated and just as deliberate as the architecture of their power.
Erasure by design.
Right. The erasure happened in distinct, calculated stages. The first stage was intensely physical and immediate. Damnatio Memoriae.
The condemnation of memory. What does that actually entail on a physical level?
When Julia Soaemias was assassinated, the state didn't stop at destroying her physical body. They engaged in a systematic campaign to physically chisel her name out of stone inscriptions all across the empire.
Literally erasing her.
Imagine laborers with hammers and chisels climbing up onto public monuments, aqueducts, and temples to violently scrape away her titles and her identity. They tried to physically remove the evidence that she had ever existed or held authority from the public eye.
But chiseling names off a few stone monuments in the provinces is only step 1. Step 2 is much more insidious and long-lasting. It involves controlling the historical narrative. You have to rewrite the books.
And the most infamous example of this is a late Roman text called the Historia Augusta.
Historia Augusta. Tell us about this text.
The Historia Augusta is a bizarre, fascinating collection of imperial biographies, likely compiled in the late 4th century CE. And it is incredibly venomously hostile to these women.
Why so hostile?
It was written by men, specifically catering to a traditional conservative Roman senatorial audience. It goes out of its way to viciously characterize them, reducing complex political operators to offensive caricatures. For example, it casually labels Julia Soaemias a prostitute and the most depraved woman in the empire.
And it literally invents fake political institutions out of thin air just to mock them.
That is the most telling part. The Historia Augusta claims that Soaemias established a women's senate on the Quirinal Hill in Rome, a senaculum mulierum.
A women's senate?
Yes, according to this highly satirical text, these women sat around holding official votes on ridiculous sumptuary laws, debating who was allowed to wear what specific kind of shoes, who had the right to use a carriage in the city, who had to yield the right of way on a public street.
It's like Mean Girls, but set in antiquity.
Exactly. It was pure malicious invention designed to mock the very concept of female political authority by reducing it to petty fashion disputes.
It also makes the scandalous claim that Soaemias regularly attended the actual Roman Senate sessions, right? That she physically walked into the Curia and sat down alongside the male senators to debate state policy.
It does make that claim, but it is crucial to note that absolutely no other primary source corroborates it. Not Cathistio, who was a senator at the time, not Herodian, not a single inscription or coin.
So they just made it up.
Yes. The Historia Augusta even contradicts its own narrative later on, claiming it was Maesa who attended the Senate, not Soaemias. You have to understand the specific Roman anxiety here. Traditional Romans viewed a woman physically entering the Senate house as a religious and political abomination.
Right.
So the author of the Historia Augusta writes that she did it specifically to frame her as a monstrous transgressor of core Roman values.
So the ancient Romans did their best to erase them or turn them into punchlines. But we cannot lay all the blame on angry men in togas. Modern history education systematically erased them too.
This brings up a critical historiographical point. Who benefits from not teaching this story?
Exactly.
For centuries, mainstream modern scholarship, stretching from Edward Gibbon's decline and fall through the 19th and early 20th centuries, largely ignored them. They were treated as exotic, scandalous footnotes, mere background characters to the real political history of the male emperors.
Which is just crazy when you think about it.
It truly wasn't until Barbara Liebig published her exhaustive biography of Julia Domna in 2007 that Domna's prominence was finally restored in mainstream academic consciousness.
When you go back and read the older historiography, it is wild. You see these Victorian-era scholars tying themselves into absolute knots trying to explain away the clear evidence of their power.
Oh, the mental gymnastics.
They would debate endlessly. Well, did these women have genuine power? Or was all of this just propaganda? As if a woman couldn't possibly be reading the mail, directing the budgets, and appointing generals.
It reveals a massive modern bias. Historians heavily influenced by 19th century political models, where women were largely excluded from formal politics, struggled profoundly to categorize informal, networked female authority.
If it wasn't written in a neat constitutional document stating the empress shall rule,
Sure, they simply dismissed the evidence in front of them. They couldn't compute the idea that being the ultimate administrative gatekeeper was ruling. Torrey's 2016 work finally broke through that centuries-old bias by legally proving that in the Roman patronage system, controlling the flow of information was functionally identical to wielding sovereign power.
But the vacuum left by centuries of academic neglect means that when people today do finally discover these women, the internet rushes in to fill the void with absolute myths.
Oh, the internet loves a good myth.
Let's do a quick lightning round to debunk the 3 most common online misconceptions about the 7 women, because the historical reality is far more fascinating than the internet rumors.
Let's clear the record.
Myth number 1. Julia Domna was the very first woman to attend the Roman Senate.
Absolutely false. There is zero primary source evidence to support this. Cassius Dio confirms she received petitions, and her name was officially included in imperial letters sent to the Senate. She managed the communication, but she did not physically attend sessions.
So where does that come from?
People online constantly conflate Domna's actual administrative role with the fabricated satirical claims made about Maesa and Soaemias a century later in the Historia Augusta.
Got it. Myth number 2. Julia Mamaea was secretly a devout Christian, and she summoned theologians to plot the creation of a Christian Roman Empire 80 years before Constantine ever had his vision.
This is a massive overstatement based entirely on a single, heavily biased source. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing his history of the church 80 to 100 years later, claims Mamaea summoned the Christian theologian Origen to Antioch.
And he calls her something specific, right?
He describes her as Theosebes, which translates to God-fearing. But Eusebius has very clear ecclesiastical motives. He is trying to build a narrative of continuous, prominent Christian history.
So she wasn't a Christian mastermind.
She was absolutely not a Christian. There is zero evidence of baptism or conversion. Her religious practice was highly syncretistic, blending various traditions. She may have been interested in Christian philosophy as an intellectual curiosity, much like she engaged with other philosophers, but portraying her as a secret Christian mastermind is a complete myth.
Myth number 3. Because they were from Emesa in Syria, Julia Domna and her family were ethnically Arab, and the name Domna actually means black in Arabic.
This is a profound anachronism. Ancient sources explicitly and consistently call her Syria, meaning Syrian. Applying Arab as a modern ethnic or national category to a 2nd century Emesene priestly family is projecting modern geographical borders and modern concepts of ethnicity onto the ancient past.
Right, they viewed the world differently.
The ancient world categorized people primarily by civic and cultural identity, not modern racial lines. Furthermore, the etymology of the name Domna is highly debated among linguists.
What are the theories?
It might relate to the Arabic word dumana, meaning a small statue. It might be derived from the Latin domina, meaning lady. Or it could be connected to the Syriac Martha. We simply do not know definitively. What we do know is that they identified culturally and politically as Syrian and Roman.
Which brings us to the definitive academic consensus of today. When you look at the peer-reviewed scholarship, the journals from Cambridge, Oxford, Brill, what do the experts actually call this dynastic powerhouse?
The standard, widely accepted scholarly term is the Severan women. Occasionally, particularly in numismatic studies of their coins, you might see them referred to as the 4 Julias or Syrian empresses, but Severan women is the proper encompassing academic terminology.
So Severan women it is.
And the historical verdict on their reign is absolute. 48 years, 4 women, 0 formal constitutional power, maximum historical impact.
Reflecting on all of this entire deep dive fundamentally challenges how we perceive influence. We are so often conditioned to believe that power is a straight line. We are taught that power is strictly what is explicitly written in a constitution, or what is mapped out in the neat little boxes of a corporate organizational chart.
Right, if you don't have the title, you don't have the power.
If your name isn't in the official box at the top, you don't hold the power.
But the 48-year reign of the Severan women proves conclusively that power is incredibly fluid.
It is about leveraging the networks you have. It's about utilizing whatever resources are at your disposal, whether that's weaponizing a massive personal fortune to buy a legion, taking total control of the mailroom to filter the emperor's reality, or having the brilliant audacity to spin a narrative that changes the fate of a dynasty.
That's the real lesson here.
It's about claiming space, step by step, title by title. And more than anything, it is about having the staggering courage to step into the void when the traditional patriarchal institutions falter. When the emperor is an inexperienced 14-year-old boy, or a weak administrator easily swayed by his troops, someone has to keep the vast machinery of the empire running.
They stepped into that void and they held the Roman world together against the encroaching chaos for half a century.
And as we saw in the streets of Rome and the mud of Mainz, they paid the absolute ultimate price for daring to do so.
They did.
They really did. I want to leave you, our listener, with one final, deeply physical thought to mull over as you process their story. We discussed how the ancient historians and hostile senators desperately tried to erase them from the record.
But they couldn't erase everything.
No, they couldn't. Consider the physical, undeniable evidence that survives today. We have their marble portrait busts sitting in the Louvre, the Vatican, and the Capitoline museums. But more importantly, we have the coins. We have over 5,500 surviving, clearly identifiable coins minted with the face of Julia Domna alone.
And those coins are imprinted with deeply symbolic legends. Legends like Pietas, Publica, public piety, projecting an image of stability and moral order to the masses.
Or Venus Victrix.
Right. Venus the Victorious, brilliantly projecting military success and imperial triumph through a distinctly feminine divine lens.
And we cannot forget Julia Soaemias' unprecedented Venus Caelestis coinage. There are nearly 800 surviving examples where she actively blends Syrian and Roman divine imagery, fusing her heritage with the state religion.
Millions of these tiny stamped pieces of metal were struck and circulated through the hands of everyday Romans across the entire known world.
If it weren't for these tiny, indestructible pieces of silver and gold surviving in the dirt for 2,000 years, we might only have the hostile writings of angry men to tell us what happened. Those coins are physical, irrefutable proof that they were there, that they mattered, and that they ruled.
They are the ultimate receipts.
So it makes you wonder about the world today. As you look at the modern institutions around you, the places where formal power supposedly resides, what unwritten, unrecorded networks of power are operating right now? What coins of invisible influence are women leaving behind today? And when the history of our era is finally written, will those modern coins be enough to survive the history books written by the victors?